Hey everyone, this is Steve Orlando, and you're listening to the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast.
Well, greetings, Cap fans, and welcome to episode 204 of the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast. I'm Rick Verbanis. I am your host, and I've got a co-host. His name is Bob Lucius. Oh, Bob. Hey, Bob. What you doing down there? Dancing alone every night? Well, I live right above you. I can hear your music playing. I can feel your body swaying. One floor below me. You don't even know me,
All right.
but I love you. Oh, my darling.
Knock 3 times, Rick.
Yeah, that's right, Bob. Knock 3 times on the ceiling if you want me.
That's it. That's it. Twice on the pipe if the answer is no.
That's right, Bob. Hey,
Yeah.
what am I doing here?
All right. That was Tony Orlando.
And Dawn.
And Dawn. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. For sure. I
And,
think that, was that first song? I think it was just Dawn. I don't know if I know by the time he did Tie Yellow Ribbon, he had it was Tony Orlando and Dawn. But I think maybe for that first song, it was just because when they first started performing, it was just Dawn.
Okay.
And then
apparently you know a lot more about this than me.
And then, as his name recognition grew, he needed to have his name, stand out. So
I gotcha.
So, but thank you.
But why am I singing Knock 3 times on the ceiling, Bob?
Well, we don't have Tony Orlando tonight.
No, we do not.
Which is a huge disappointment to me. But we do have Steve Orlando joining.
We do. We have a special guest joining the show today, Steve Orlando, and no offense to Steve Orlando. This was a running joke from Bob for a while when we announced that we had Steve coming on the show, and he goes, "Oh, I loved him with Dawn." I was like, "You got the wrong Orlando." So I had to, of course, greet him with that today. Yeah, Bob, we're excited to have Steve on the show. Steve is a prolific writer. He's been writing for over 10 years, Marvel and DC, as well as Image and other publishers. And he has a brand new Avengers series that he is launching, coming out next week, if you're listening to the show on the day that this debuts, and coming out next week, and it is Avengers Assemble. And also, if you listened to last episode at 203, where we covered Avengers Curse of the Man-Thing, you're familiar with Steve Orlando's work because we reviewed it panel by panel.
Yeah, and that was a great story, and there were so many little details in that book. And I want to give it away in case folks haven't had a chance to listen to that episode yet. But details about Cap's background, details about Man-Thing's background, some interesting new characters. There's a lot to talk about with Steve tonight, and a lot of questions to ask him about how do you come up with all that stuff?
Yeah, can't wait to get him on the show. And speaking of creators, Bob, there is some birthdays being celebrated this week. So if you're listening today, which is September 4th, when this airs, in just a couple of days, Bob, on September 6th, we have the winner of the favorite Captain America artist March Madness that we did earlier this year. None other than Captain America artist
Carlos Pacheco.
Mike Zeck. It was Mike Zeck, Bob.
I know. Who else could it be?
Well, it depends on what year we're talking about. But this year, Mike Zeck won the Captain America favorite artist, and happens to be my favorite Captain America artist. And his birthday is on September 6th. So happy birthday to Mike. He is still enjoying his quasi semi-retirement. I think he's over in the Philippines.
In the Philippines,
and enjoying that. And one day one day we hope
One
to have
day.
him on the show.
I feel like we should have said happy birthday in Tagalog or something. Just
Do you know how to say that?
I don't. I have no idea.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, kudos to you for even knowing Tagalog. So, all right. Another birthday this week would be for a Captain America artist that doesn't get nearly the love that Zek does, and that is Frank Robbins.
Frank Robbins.
Frank Robbins, his birthday would have been September 9th.
September 9th. Happy birthday, Frank. Acquired taste. But like anything, it does, your tastes change over time. So
It's
give it
true.
another shot.
Exactly. Bob, you know what? I don't want to keep our guest in the green room waiting too long. Should we go ahead and let him in?
Let's do it.
Auto insurance can all seem the same until it comes time to use it. So don't get stuck paying more for less coverage. Switch to USAA Auto Insurance and you could start saving money in no time. Get a quote today. Restrictions apply.
Our guest today is an American comic book writer known for the Spider-Man 2099, Scarlet Witch, and Marauders series from Marvel, and writing such DC Comics characters as Batman, Martian Manhunter, and Wonder Woman, and 2 series starring Midnighter, which were nominated for a GLAAD Media Award. Cap fans may know him from the 2021 Avengers Curse of the Man-Thing, but we're mainly excited to discuss his upcoming series starring Cap, Avengers Assemble. We're excited to have Steve Orlando join us today. Steve, welcome to the show.
It is my pleasure to be here, and I'm excited to talk about Cap. I haven't gotten to write him a lot, but he's one of my favorite Marvel characters, so I was happy to come on. It was an instant yes from me.
Well, I do think I read that somewhere that your favorite Marvel character was Captain America. Why is that? Like, what makes Cap such a relatable character to you?
Well, I don't know if he's relatable because I'm kind of a piece of shit, to be honest. But he's aspirational, is what I would say. I think that he sort of combines. I mean, well, I don't really believe in comic book tribalism. We should love DC and we should love Marvel, but my journey is like a game of Pong. The first comic I ever got was a West Coast Avengers comic in the mid '80s. But we didn't have a comic store on my side of the city, so I was just picking up things in like back issue bins and things like that. So I was like Marvel, and then we got a Walden Books with a spinner rack, and it was like the Clone Saga come the early '90s, and I was still all the way in because look, Scarlet Spider had a sleeveless hoodie, and that shit was cool as hell.
Yeah.
Still is to me. But then when we did get a comic store, for whatever reason, I jumped right into Grant Morrison's Justice League. So I sort of hopped over and became sort of a DC guy. The reason I say that is because I think Cap gives folks, when he's written right, which I like to think I do, but regardless, when he's written right, he kind of gives people what they want out of Batman and Superman in the best way. A lot of folks love Batman because quote unquote he's just a man, and now I would argue like yes, he's just a man, but he's also a multi-billionaire, so that's not necessarily the most like tangible, relatable life. But there's an inherent risk to what he does. But there's also the darkness, the brooding, all these things. Superman does the right thing because he was raised, to do the right thing. Because even though he has all these powers, he was quote unquote raised right, and his family said you're not any better or worse than anybody else. He just does the best he can, the most he can, and what he can do, of course, is a little bit more than you and me. So with Cap, I feel like you get a little bit of the best of both worlds. He's peak human. If you want to go with the Ed Brubaker, he's 3 times as everything as the peak human could ever be. 3 times faster, 3 times as resilient, whatever, what have you. But in the world of comic books, that's relatively human, all things considered. And yet, despite that, his relative lack of power, he delivers in the way that Superman does. He's there for the people that need him. He is, even though I didn't love everything that happened in it as a reader, like, you see in Civil War, like with everything going on, he's most pissed off because he's supposed to be playing baseball with a Make-A-Wish kid. Like he's the guy that that makes the time for the people that need him and delivers on the promise. Right now, with Superman, that's truth, justice, and the American way. Truth, justice, and a better tomorrow. Take your pick. But Cap, it's all about the dream. It's all about the ideal. So, and he sort of embodies that. And I think it's impressive because, of course, he embodies it while being relatively a human. It is all in the poise. It's all in the experience. You think back to the Frank Miller. He's got a voice that can command a god and does.
Yeah, Daredevil, that was great.
And I'm someone with a stake in the game when it comes to the country, when it comes to equality for any number of reasons. So to me, a character that, again, when I think he follows the intent of his original creators, is anything but a lapdog. I mean, he's loyal only to the dream. And I'll get a little emotional every time I see someone write that. Sadly, I've never been able to, but the time may come, right? So, and I think it's almost more compelling because it's even, when Superman says those things, he is one of the all-time heavy hitters. Cap isn't the biggest dog in nearly any fight, but he's still going to fight every single one. And I think that kind of says a lot about who he is.
Wow, a lot to unpack there, but I want to start with what you said about when Captain America is written correctly. Do you have some favorite Captain America writers, people that you feel that really captured the essence of Steve Rogers?
I mean, look, my wedding ring has Kirby Crackle and circuitry on it, so it's hard not to go directly to the source. I think that it's telling that Cap was created by two pre-America's entry into World War II Jews like myself who did not like what was going on and said, well, we're going to do something. I mean, he was ahead of the curve with that. And so I love the original stuff, and I love even is it the bicentennial special that Kirby did with Mr. 1 and Mr. 2 and Magneto, which I actually think is decades ahead of his time, because the whole thing is Magneto telling Cap that, despite his intentions, which are good, he's not a mutant, and he can't understand. He needs to do more work to understand what help really is. I mean, that's a story you could put out today. So I love that run, of course, and anytime the King came back, I loved it. I as a kid, I grew up on, I'm going to kill myself here because was it Grunwald that worked with Mike Zeck in that sort of
that was
era?
J.M. DeMatteis.
Okay, yeah. So I was gonna say I knew I was gonna eat shit on that because I'm more of a what happened in the story versus who wrote it.
That's okay. Yeah, yeah. DeMatteis did
But
kind of like 3 years before Mark Grunwald took over.
But of course, like that 80s era, and I would point out as well, I think soon after that was probably Scourge of the Underworld. But and Scourge has been played out now, but that again, that original story I think says all you need to know about Cap. He's defending his quote unquote enemies, because it's the right thing to do. And then I was out for a little while with Heroes Reborn, but I was all the way back in with the Wade and Garney run. I actually really, even though I don't know how, as a kid, and I do still think there's a ton of great stuff in it. I like the John Nay Ryber and Cassidy run, though it's controversial, but I don't necessarily think should be for the reasons people think. It's a little reactionary, but I like the way, I like the way it frames a lot of Cap's mythos, even if some of the beats maybe aren't what they should have been. And then like I'm big into some of the iconic moments that aren't in his own run, like we didn't necessarily get the exact moment in the movie, but to me one of the quintessential Cap moments is in Infinity War. Or Infinity Gauntlet, pardon me. I had just said, he's not the biggest dog in any fight, but he's going to always fight it. I mean, he's the last guy standing, and he's going to take that swing at Thanos, even though there's no fucking way it's going to do anything. But he's got to. It's like a compulsion in him. So I love those moments. I like, well, bizarrely, I like a lot of his interactions in J.L.A. versus Avengers. I actually love a lot of the small character moments in that book. And even, weirdly, it's funny. I think that he's often thought of as analogous to Batman. So I think a lot of those crossovers really paint him interestingly. I like a lot of the way he acts in the original DC versus Marvel crossover, and how they are different and how they are similar, and how it is the two of them sort of arguing these universal powers in the form of the living tribunal and the specter to take action as they can, and inspiring these all-powerful beings when it's just really these two guys, you know. And I could pick and choose more, but like you'll see the commonplace, the common thread in all these stories to me is the drive, the unwavering dedication to, once again, what is morally right but not necessarily situationally convenient, and that to me is him. So like I mean, I could go on about moments and more that I like, but that's always going to be the through line, you know. I think the effect he has on other people, the way he inspires people, and of course, like the basic fact that the design itself is genius. The having his weapon be a defensive weapon, almost 80 plus years ago, is one of the most genius moves in comics.
So, Steve, we got to jump in the Wayback Time machine and learn a little bit about how you broke into comics. Now, I heard, from some previous interviews that you sort of got into comics pretty young, and you got interested in creating comics. But how did that initial interest? How did you leverage that to find your way into the industry itself?
I mean, 20 years of work. It's I don't have one of those cool, some of us have these cool stories. We're like, oh, we ran into someone at a diner and then we hit it off. Mine is well, there's no one story, as a matter of fact. Nearly everybody's way in is different, but mine is the very blue collar way. I started going to conventions and trying to break into comics when I was about 12 years old. I read an article about Superman turning electric blue and how it was never going to go back, and this was the new Superman. And of course, I was alarmed. I had to get in on it because he was never changing back. But in the Syracuse New Times, which was the paper where I lived, it could have been the Post Standard. There were two papers back then in Syracuse. There was just like they broke down how it was happening and how the creative process went. And that's sort of where I realized that though I had been dabbling in art, like I wanted to be the first person holding the baton, which is the writer. And so I started going to shows and finding out how to do this thing. I met the people that would go on to be my mentors and some of my best friends that year. To be Joe Kelly and Steve Siegel, who were then, working on X-Men and Uncanny. And for almost 20 years, I would bring them new comics once, twice, three times a year at conventions. And ask them, for a critique. I would hear what was ready to go, and I would more importantly hear what was not yet professional level, and I would come back and I would do it again and do it again. Like, to be honest, like my first cons, I was like collecting fucking cans and such to pay for my airplane tickets. That was the deal I cut with my parents because I couldn't fly across the country by myself at age 12. Later on, of course, I did. And then I, could pay for flights with a real human job when I was of age. But I did that, and it's not like some story, I'm not here to say that I was forthright and driven throughout those times. I probably quit 1,000 times. But I would call my mentors and they would say, oh, like if it's if it's that hard, you should just quit. And for me, that's the type of motivation that would get me pissed off, and I was good for another 6 months. It's not for everybody, but that's what worked for me. And yeah, I did that from the ages 12 to, I guess, math is not necessarily a writer's strong suit. I started at 12, and my first ongoing debuted when I was 29. So I guess that's actually, 17 years?
Mm-hmm.
Like for folks listening, it doesn't have to take that long. But it also can, or it could even take longer. But the point is, it can't happen. That's why you can't quit, because if you quit 1,000 times, it could have been the 1,001st try that was going to get you in.
Yep, there's a testament to grit and resilience. 17 years.
And also, like I'm from upstate New York and half Italian, so spite and stubbornness is
that helps. Yeah,
it really does.
So during that time, over the course of 17 years, obviously you were reading before then. You must have had some writers out there that you thought were just ones that you wanted you admired and you wanted to emulate. Like, do you have some influences there that you want to maybe talk about?
I mean, anyone who's read my work can probably see a pretty strong Grant Morrison influence, and that's there. Grant is a huge influence on me. Outside of comics, because comics are not the only thing I was into as a kid. You know, strongly influenced by like a lot of Russian literature as well. I lived in Russia in 2007. It's one of the things I studied in college. So, you know, I usually say Grant Morrison and Mikhail Bulgakov. It'd be hard not to say Thomas Mann as well. Pardon me, not well. Actually, that's true, but I meant to say Michael Mann, but Thomas Mann is also true. And then like, you know, a lot of the classic storytelling. I'm strongly influenced. I love Silver Age stuff. I love the absurdity and wild ideas of comics. So it's hard not to say like a Gardner Fox. It's hard not to say if you're going into the 80s, the guy that wrote the first comic I ever bought, Steve Englehart. It would be wrong not to say like Ann Nocenti. Like they come from all over. And of course, like people like Priest, who are foundational historic creators. Like if you haven't read Priest, then you kind of like, what are you doing in comics, in my opinion? So those would be. It's not a Mount Rushmore, but because it's more like a rambling list. But that's what you get with me, because I tend to consume a lot of story stuff.
You know, I'd like to learn a little bit more about your creative process. So it seems like an overwhelming task, like it could be anyway. So you've been handed a character or a title, and like for example, like in Avengers: Curse of the Man thing. Like, how do you get started? I mean, what's that process look like for you?
Well, one of the beneficial things in how I was taught comics, at least, is that the whole gig was sort of and it's going to sound weird, but it is a positive, was kind of unromanticized from the time I was young. You know, I was a 12-year-old kid and my mentor was telling me that writer's block is the luxury of amateurs. And if you want this to be a job, you need to treat it like a job and write every day, no matter what, no excuses. And that's kind of how I am now. Even when I try to take a day off, I do, but I'm usually still like jotting things down in like a notebook for new pitches or new ideas or things like that. When you have a dream job, it's not that it's not work, but it's also, you know, you're also living the dream, right? So it's a little bit of both. And I think that is beneficial. It's not that this isn't a creative process, and of course it is. But I sort of, I was never one, one of my old jobs, it doesn't matter where it was, because I've talked about what I did before, and I don't want to bury this guy too much. But one of my old jobs, my boss was an MFA from a prestigious Ivy League school. And while I was still working for him, he, I would work with my commute included, it was about a 15-hour day because I had an hour and a half commute both ways. And he would always say, Steve, I don't understand how you write, because you work here all day. What do you do? And I said, well, I work here. I go home. I eat dinner for an hour or a half hour, and then I write for 3 hours. And then I go to bed and I come back. And he at the time said, oh, well, it's interesting because I think that's what makes you a professional and makes me an artist. And that's a cute thing to say. But he's never been published to this day. So, I think that the thing about the process and getting into these things is knowing where to put that brainstorm and that ideating. And that's a big part. And like, that's almost the mentally taxing part when you've been doing it. At this point, I'm 10 years in the game, and like I'm outlining the next Avengers thing right now. And that's where like you're doing things from whole cloth, and without spoiling what it was, it's going to be, you'll see what it is, but it's extensive. It's 20 plus chapters. And like today, even though I'm only writing, I don't know, like a paragraph summary for each chapter, / issue, I'm more mentally exhausted today than if I'd been actually writing scripts all day, because that's the real whole cloth work. And then it's all about implementation. And so how do I, to specifically answer your question, like you spend the time and the big creative calories and the brain power on the outlining, on the whole cloth storytelling. What I'm lucky at I think, is that the actual implementation, that, as I said, has been unromanticized for me for decades. You gotta like, not that it's not fun or creative, it absolutely is, but that hump of like, oh, it's creative work, so we need to light a couple candles and like, like take some ayahuasca, and then maybe we write about superheroes. No, you get down, you get to work. And for better or worse, that's always how I was trained.
Bob brought up Curse of the Man thing, and we actually just covered the first one, the first part, Avengers: Curse of the Man thing. We covered it panel by panel, and it was a real pleasant surprise to see how much it features Cap in the story.
It's almost
And
like he's one of my favorite characters, and I didn't know if I was ever going to work for Marvel again, huh?
it came through. It came through. Because yeah, it was the first time you wrote Cap. What type of research did you put into this? Because you get into some details here, and it was your first time writing Cap, as you mentioned. Maybe never again. You had no idea. So how much work went into that?
Well, again, I'm lucky in a way. I mean, your mileage may vary. I am at either company, I've become kind of known as a dude who has a good memory for all these things. Cap, in Cap's case, I already kind of knew, like, for folks who don't know, he gets confronted by all these other people who had sort of suffered due to other groups and other factions desire to create a new Captain America. And even though he wasn't directly responsible in the Dreadscape inside Man Thing, he's confronted as though he is. And without burying myself too much as someone who should go outside more, I already knew who all these Caps were. Especially Protocide, the one that maybe surprised most people because he was part of the Wade and Garney run back in the day.
Actually, Dan Jurgens.
What?
Yeah. Yeah, it was in the volume 3 of Captain America, which Mark Waid started, but then Dan Jurgens took over and he actually created Protocide. We only know those because we had Dan Jurgens on the show.
This is not Dan Jurgens' art. Oh, you know what? It's because it's Andy Kubert art, I'm. But yes, I'll give you him as the. I was picturing the wiki thing, and I was like, that's not how Dan draws. But that's because it wasn't. That's because he didn't draw it. Well, okay. So as I said, a character person more than a who created a person. But yeah, no, I mean, and I knew who these guys were. I wanted to explore this idea of how you might put guilt on someone like Cap, and of course how we would overcome it with his real understanding of the situation. So, I mean, listen, I especially love Protocide. I would have loved to do more with him, but we need the space that we can. And hopefully hopefully the time will come in the future when I could do more. But no, I mean, the thing is that the Dreadscape was created by myself and Mark Paniccia, who edited this, to sort of give us a chance to do these character examinations on the people. So of course it was going to be Cap at first because he's one of my favorites, and we knew the angle, right? Like if we're going to throw and it would hurt him if he didn't understand the reality. Not, I mean, not in a physical way, but knowing that other people suffered even if it wasn't technically his fault. I mean, that would piss him off. So we knew it would push his buttons. So it's a little bit of that as to why they showed up. And then of course, like again, me as a hybrid DC and Marvel fan, I'll probably never get to do a story where Starman is confronted by like the Starman of 1951 and the 1970s McCall Thomas Starman and all these things. So and to this day, I would love to explore every single, all the people that have been Cap besides Steve. I don't know who would buy that book, but maybe someone would. So I just had
probably a handful of
on this podcast, of course. There's always a worry for people who aren't diehard that it becomes a little bit of a wiki entry. But I love those characters. I love the contrast, and I love examining sort of what Cap meant in all those years that Steve was in the ice. And to be clear, one of the interesting things is that as we go on, I think an untapped opportunity is that the time he was in the ice, to be frank, gets longer and longer. The time will come where we'll have to examine what the Captain America of the 1990s or the 1980s would have looked like, because guess what? He was still frozen then. Honestly, probably even right now, he was probably still frozen in the 80s, if I'm being honest. But that's that's a discussion for myself and the editors to unpack. This is sort of like when I joined DC, we were all horrified in the New 52 era or the post New 52 era to realize that most likely the Zorro movie that Bruce saw with his parents was the 2005 Legend of Zorro.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. I was going to go with the what was it, Ricardo Montalban?
Oh man, way too old. At minimum, it would be
Gotta be
the other Banderas Zorro.
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh yeah.
sadly, it's probably not even the first one, much better one. It's probably the 05. I mean, I would gladly say that it was the one from the 90s because I think it's much better, but I do think it's probably, I mean, listen, it's probably the 2005 now.
That is, I haven't even really thought about that, but man, you make an excellent point.
I still struggle with it today. Like, no character is big and no character is small to me, probably because one of the first things I started picking up at flea markets were the Who's and the Marvel handbooks. So, like, you know, I didn't. It's why I like. I think I like a lot of quote unquote obscure characters at DC too, because when you're learning about these characters through those or through like non-sports trading cards, they all get the same screen time, you know.
Mhm. That's a good
So
point.
years ago, even as when I started reading more, I was like, why don't all these other fans want to know about the Spirit of '76 and fucking and like, well, it's because he appeared like 4 times
Yeah.
50 years ago. But again, when the first thing you read is who's who in the handbook, you don't know that.
Right.
Yeah, we're going to jump right into the upcoming Avengers Assemble miniseries. It comes out Wednesday, September 11th. And here's the solicitation for number 1. Return to Avengers Mansion. When vampires attacked, a ragtag group of volunteer Avengers changed the tide of battle. And in the aftermath, Captain America has formed the Avengers Emergency Response Squad. Steve's handpicked team of veterans and newcomers live and train in Avengers Mansion, and when Captain America sounds the mission horn, whoever's on base has seconds to pack up and deploy. When the Red Skull's daughter discovers a dangerous artifact, Cap, Wasp, Photon, and Shang-Chi set out to stop her, while Hawkeye hosts a poker game for the late arrivals. Will the Avengers, and I like this, it's Avenge and then ERS and periods. That's the Emergency Response Squad. I like that.
Yes.
Will they pass their first real test? And did someone say jackets? Spinning out of Jed McKay's Avengers, comic powerhouses Steve Orlando and Corey Smith join forces to expand the world of the Avengers. So first, I just want to say congrats on Marvel calling you a powerhouse.
I mean, that's very kind of them.
But
I'll
you know,
take it.
there's a lot going on here. So the story seems to center around Cap. Your team has other former Avenger leaders on it, such as Wasp and Photon and Hawkeye. Why is this Cap's team? Why did you pick him?
Well, I'm not going to stand on ceremony and say that the fact that when we were talking about doing another Avengers book, a lot of the classic Avengers were free, was not an automatic thing to consider, right? Like Jed's team is one of the most, on stats wise, powerful teams they've, pardon me, had. But a lot of the classics were free, including Steve Rogers, right? And we've also seen, and the big thing is we saw that in Blood Hunt, which folks now know because it's over, he was going to form this impromptu team of Avengers, and we thought that'd be a great jumping off point to form this auxiliary team, especially knowing that Blood Hunt was going to lead into this next thing with Doctor Doom. And the chance to bring a little bit of quote unquote realism into the book, which is that, in real life, I've done disaster relief work. I work with World Central Kitchen. I wrote a book with Jose Andres. And the fact is that unlike in comic books, like disasters don't actually line up single file. They stack, they keep happening. And knowing that these things were going to happen and keep happening in the Marvel universe, and knowing we could build off the impromptu team, this is why we came around to Steve doing this in a more organized way. The Avengers are essentially, as you saw, it's emergency response team. That's not just me nodding to Wildcats in the 90s, even though I love that shit. It is the fact that, this is an Avengers mansion that works like a firehouse, like people will always be on duty, so that if something happens, they can respond immediately. And not everybody is going to go out on every single mission because, that's not how, to be frank, firehouses and fire squads work. Because what if there's another one? So this gave us a chance to build this team that could be prepared not just for one crisis, but for multiple crises, and also get that firehouse vibe, get that, what I would casually say is a little bit of a 1980s superhero team vibe. I don't say Avengers because it's an Avengers vibe. It's also a Justice League International vibe, and get a little bit of that character interaction back in. it's an opportunity we saw because, well, like everything is amazing and blockbuster and huge in the made Avengers books. It should be. It's Avengers. But here we are to give people a little bit of a hybrid feel. And, on a basic level, why Steve Rogers? Well, it's because when Cap asks you to do something, you do it, like to be quite honest. Like we need to know who is this guy that can inspire everyone to come on board for this team, even if, by the way, they think that he's got something to learn from them. Like this is not me. I'm not here to say, I mean, Steve is not a perfect person. But you're wearing a shirt that says humility. So he knows that. And so this is not him always having the answer, but it is him saying, we need you. And when Cap says we need you, most people fucking listen.
My ears perked up when you said Justice League International. I'm a big fan from that comic series in the late 80s and early 90s. Does that mean when you say it's a little bit like JLI, is it because of the international aspect of it, or are you talking there's going to be a little bit of a sense of humor with the teammates?
There's a little bit of wahaha, like I mean as for the actual roster, a little bit less so, just for reasons going on in the Marvel universe. But yes, no, it is a lot of it is a tone and point of view thing where we will be spending time with the team in the mansion, and of course we'll be spending time with the part of the team that is deployed, dealing with whatever is going on. And it'll have that Silver Age feel as well. There's going to be an overarching villain that'll build to our finale, but each issue has its own sort of own wild threat. The first issue, I mean, I'm trying to think about what's illustrated. The first issue is a new powered up version of Sin, the Red Skull's daughter. The second issue is the revenge of the ghosts of the super apes. Issue 3, what the hell? Like issue 3 debuts some new Night Stalkers in light of Blood Hunt. And for folks who haven't seen, like at the end of Blood Hunt, essentially all vampires can survive in the daylight now. So a lot of it deals with unpacking how we're going to integrate them into society. And then issue 4 deals with some of the stuff with what that's coming up with Doom and one of his former heralds who's very angry with him. So we've had a chance to tell these. When I say a Silver Age type delivery, I don't necessarily mean in dialogue or art style, but what I mean is you're getting a full story in every issue plus a little more, plus a building backstory. And I think that's more important now than it was 50, 60 years ago in the quote unquote Silver Age, because back then, comics were like a shiny nickel. Now they're quite expensive. So I want to give folks as much as we possibly can every issue.
That sounds great. We can't wait for it. We do have a few questions sent in from our patrons who are excited for this new Avengers series. Matthew Glover, he asks, how did you decide on the characters for this story? So the Avengers part of Cap's team that he handpicked are Hawkeye, and this is alphabetical order here. Hawkeye, Hercules, Lightning, which is Miguel Santos, Lightspeed, which is Julie Power from the Power Pack, Night Thrasher, Photon, which is Monica Rambeau, Shang-Chi, She-Hulk, Wasp, and Wonder Man. How did you come up with this group?
Well, listen, I sort of hinted at it before. These are nearly all of them are classic Avengers, and they were free to join the team. So we want to give longtime Avengers readers and new ones that classic feel, or I shouldn't even say classic, the iconic feel. But then when you have people like Night Thrasher and Lightspeed, a lot of it's about perspective. Like this is a team that needs to be there for everyone, not just the type of people that feel comfortable around Steve Rogers. So we need new perspectives, and he knows that. Again, like I mean, he knows he doesn't have all the answers. So once we realized that who can be on here for the first time, it was like, what can we get out of it? With Night Thrasher and Lightspeed, you have two former teen heroes from two different generations that are now sort of both joining the Avengers for the first time. I'm not going to say like graduating, because Night Thrasher is a grown-ass man and Lightspeed is in college. But what they are doing is joining the Avengers for the first time, and they're bringing a point of view that is needed for this team, right? Like, because they can't just always be the old Avengers everybody knows. So it was, to be frank, we're going to take every big Avenger we can that isn't on the team right now, because folks love those characters and they deserve a spotlight. And then it became, with our additional sort of roster numbers, who can we graduate up to the team that is going to bring something new and fresh, and who's going to have great chemistry with people that are already on the roster. Hercules was a big surprise for me. I didn't. I mean, I always liked him, but I didn't expect to like him as much as I do. And Wonder Man has been too. You know, I conversely, I always liked Wonder Man, but his current sort of status as a pacifist is interesting to me. You know, again, as someone who's been on the ground doing relief myself. That's not to say that he's naive or a fool, but I think he's an incredibly strong character. I mean, Wonder Man is one of the physically strongest and most indestructible Avengers there is, maybe even immortal, since he's an ionic being. So I think it's kind of interesting because, well, to be frank, a lot of people don't like pacifism. You know, they'll think it's for cowards, or they'll think that it's a soft issue. Take your pick, you know, of their predisposed notions. But you can't dismiss Wonder Man. So I think the idea that he has a position that a lot of people don't want, figure it out, let's talk about it, let's not fight. Well, you know, a lot of people, when they hear that, will just, you know, backhand that person saying, let's not fight. But if you backhand Wonder Man, you're not coming back with a hand. So it
Yeah.
is, I think it's interesting that he has such power and such an imposing status with that forces people, in many cases. He's an immovable object in a lot of ways, so it forces people to listen to him. It forces people to consider his point of view, be them hero or villain alike. And I think that's really interesting. So there's something like that for every character, you know, as to what our way into them is. But the key is we want to get as much Avengers into this book as we can, especially folks who haven't been given a spotlight in a minute. And that's what we're going to do. Look, I mean, I love Lightning. I'm not going to say he's one of the first queer characters at Marvel, one of them, and he's always spoken to me, but he hasn't really shown up since No Surrender, and I'm excited for him to be back. And I mean, he's been around, but nothing really huge, and I love that dude. And I like that his win in No Surrender was not related to his electricity powers, but him being very good at poker, which will play into the book as well. But so it's just about, as usual, who's there, who's going to be exciting for us, and of course, who's going to be exciting for the readership.
So with this being only a 5-issue miniseries and with that many characters, how do you plan to to balance that all out and give sufficient screen time per se to these folks?
I mean, we're going to do our best. I'm not going to sit here and say that doing a team book isn't a juggling act. It is. In fact, every time I do one, I say never again, and then they keep showing up with money and saying, "What if you did a team book?" Um, but I like a challenge, and we're going to try to make sure that everybody gets a moment, right? And we get all of our nods to the stories we love and things like that. But listen, I'm not going to sit here and say that we need anything less than like a flow chart for these things, because there is a lot of characters here, and hopefully everybody gets a moment to shine. But if they don't, hey, there'll be the question of what comes next, and that is already in the works as well.
So you mentioned for this first issue that the villain is Red Skull's daughter, Sin, and you said she's souped up now. Now, the last time we saw her, well, I think was the 2021 miniseries, The United States of Captain America. What was it about her that, got her to make it into your story?
I mean, again, it's a Cap-led team, and if I wasn't going to use the Red Skull, I wanted to use someone. Well, to be frank, Sin has appeared less, and so it's a little easier to do things that he hasn't done before with her. But no, I mean, a lot of these things come to what feels right to me. And if we're going to do a Cap-led book, I couldn't think of anyone more appropriate for our first villain than, especially with a team that is going to be a unifying team, a team that is there for everybody, than someone who feeds on hate and someone who thrives on hate. Even better that he's the daughter of Cap's longtime enemy. So if this is a new generation, a new formation of heroes, it felt right for them to be facing someone that sort of sums up their polar opposite thematically, and that is Sin, especially once she's possessed by the goddess of hate, as you'll see in the issue.
You were talking about Night Thrasher and Lightning and I read this interview with you, Chris Salito, over at Geeks Out, and he asked you what sort of characters that interested you, and you used this phrase. I think it was deep cut, And you said that you were naturally drawn, I think, to deep cut characters and concepts. That is, characters that maybe are really interesting, but maybe haven't been seen in a while, or maybe they just don't have a prominent place, sort of in the eye of the public square or pop culture. So, are there other Marvel characters you'd like to explore that maybe we haven't seen in a while, or that you are particularly drawn to, that you think would be interesting to maybe give some screen time to?
Oh, I mean, there always are. I mean, it's not a big secret. I love the Inhumans and haven't been able to use them as much as I would like. For this podcast, it's worth noting I'm also a big fan of a ton of Marvel's Golden Age characters who almost never appear. So if you want the real, like, and I don't think that these are not the right story. Needs to be it needs to come along for these characters, because you need to have the right spotlight to get people's eyes on it, because they're not well known. But yeah, if you want me to do big reaches, I love the Golden Age Vision. I love Blazing Skull. I really like those two. I mean, I'm intrigued by the original Angel. I love Destroyer. Um, wasn't Was it Liberty Legion is what the Spirit of
Oh,
76 was on?
yeah, yeah,
So like I love that stuff. I love Dominic Fortune and like what has now become known as the 1950s Avengers.
yeah.
Like so I could go on and on. But the thing is, of course, we have to find a story that fits it, because there's not an intrinsic draw to these characters. Otherwise, they'd already have a book. So, but with the right story, of course, that you can show people why they deserve love. So that's my hope. And I love the big one is that I love the original Human Torch, and that's like top of my list. Hopefully he will show up someday, because I love Jim Hammond. I hope to do more. I hope to do something with him, and then I hope to do more with him, because I'm a big fan.
Yeah.
Was
Well,
does that go back to your first comic, West Coast Avengers, when Jim Hammond showed up?
So that was the run or the era, but that was not the first one I bought. The first book, by complete happenstance, as you might imagine, it was issue 16. So it chiefly features Hellcat and Tigra fighting Tiger Shark. But yes, like I mean, well, so that is why one of the reasons I like Jim Hammond. I also like that he killed Hitler, which is nice.
Yeah.
But I also, because of that in the Avengers arcade game, it's why, like, to me, like Vision in the white costume, like when that happened in WandaVision, that was finally had my moment. It still feels strange to me when he's in the green, yellow, and red, even though that is very obviously his more popular costume. But that was the era, as you said, like that Hank Pym in a red Michael Myers jumpsuit. That was my stuff. Massive Firestorm sleeve Mockingbird. Although Mockingbird, she should be on that list too. I don't know if she's going to show up in Assemble, but I would certainly like her to show up in the future.
Matthew Glover also asks, what was the inspiration behind the decision to go back to the Avengers Mansion?
Man, like I'm sure that some people would give like very like idea or like thematic or literary answers, but the fact is that the mansion was there and it was open for the taking, so of course I'm going to use it. Because the Avengers, the quote unquote main Avengers, have taken up residency in the is it the Impossible City that Jed has? They've taken up residence in a giant living sentient city that is not Avengers Mansion. So once we sat down to the book again, you have this discussion with editorial. What is in play that hasn't shown up in a while? What can we highlight that is going to get people excited? And top of that list was the mansion.
Nice. Another patron, Mark Domeyer, asks, can't wait for this series, Steve. Your writing has always captured the essence of the characters you write. We know this is a limited series, but has Marvel given any hints at what it would take to come back and make this happen again down the line?
Well, to be honest, without being craven, the answer to this is always the same, and it is sales. So and that's might seem like a little bit of a cop-out answer, but that really is it. Reviews are great, strong reviews are great, but the language of any type of publisher is how many people are buying this book. So if that is a message that folks want to send, buying stuff, pre-ordering stuff, but buying stuff as a periodical versus a trade paperback or digital, that is the way to send the message. Now, that being said, I'm doing fine. I would write this book forever, but I also think it's very important to say folks should read comics how they are most comfortable. And so if that is digital or if that is a trade paperback, that's great and you should do it. But if the question is what is going to send the strongest message, the answer for the moment is always going to be buying the periodical book. And that's how you want to communicate that.
I've read your interviews, in prep for tonight, and I know
God.
that yeah, going back quite a way, and you've spoken really forcefully about the importance of representation in comics, reaffirming, what Stan Lee talked about, just telling stories in a world like the one right outside your window, and we've had Tom Brevoort on the show, and we've had Alana Smith on the show as editors, and talking about sort of the editorial case for representation as well as the business case for why it's important. But like as a creator, what's the creator perspective on why representation matters?
Well, I mean, you have already, in a way, you've already said it, especially in Marvel, but in all cases, the mandate is to depict the world outside your window. That's how, if you want to go all the way back to like the jargon that we learn as creators, DC is the world like we wish it could be, and Marvel is the world like it is. So it's incumbent on us to actually depict that. And often at times it's as simple as that. Like, but I can only answer for myself. I wouldn't feel honest as a storyteller if I wasn't depicting a world as it is right now. Because our job is to tell stories that are authentic, that are gripping, hopefully provocative, hopefully, and for me at least, tell things that are again, I said provocative, but thought provoking versus thought affirming. I want to be surprised by a book. When I watch a TV show or a movie or read a book or what have you, I don't want to just feel that everything I already think is great or correct and have a pat on the back. I want to think. And that doesn't mean, oh, you're wrong, Steve, but it means maybe have you thought about it this way? Maybe did you learn something you didn't know about before? So many things that I know about in life, not like capital T things that are important for my day to day, but like just weird, strange concepts are things I learned from comics because someone threw them in, back in the 80s or 90s. Now, of course, sometimes I learned that was some pseudo jargon bullshit upon researching it further, but not always,
Yeah.
These are dumb examples, but I learned the word pontificate from Jeff Johns and Steve Sadowski in Justice Society, or JSA it was styled back then, and I learned what a duodenum was from Justice League of America. So those are goofy examples,
Right.
but it's also true. And so no, like I think that when it comes to representation, again, we're living in 2024. We're living in the now, and if our job is to tell stories and depict a version of this world, and especially with Marvel, that's what it is. It's through a superhero lens, but that is a version of this world. Then, like I said, like we're not doing our job if we're not thinking about these things, and understanding that it often does take a little extra work, but that's part of the deal. We're already privileged to be making comics. We're privileged to be making things up for a living. Sometimes it does mean a little extra research. Sometimes it does mean a little more work. But the reward, of course, is that you tell a story that's moving to people. The reward, of course, is when you go to conventions and people who maybe haven't read comics before say that yours is the one that got them in because they finally felt like they had a place here. And look, like I don't think that any creator who says they don't care what their readers think is really telling the truth. That doesn't mean that they're in charge, of course, because then you're creating by committee, but you want people to enjoy what you're doing. And so I think that is an extra bonus when you do this, when you do the work to tell a story that's maybe a little harder for you, maybe a little more work intensive for you. But then the dividend is you go to a show. And again, there's people that have never been to a Comic-Con before. They're there because of your work, that have never loved this thing you love. If you want me to be even more sincere, almost to the limits of my sincerity, they've loved this thing that you've loved for a long time because you gave them a way in. I think that's not just important, that's part of the game.
That's awesome. I also read a little nugget in one of these interviews that I got to follow up on. And it said that one of your earliest comic art stories featured a character like Doughboy with superpowers, and everybody in this show knows that I'm a big fan of Jack Kirby's Doughboy, so I got to get the backstory on this.
Oh my God. Well, except the backstory is far more embarrassing than you could ever imagine.
Oh, okay. Well, do tell.
Yeah, definitely gotta hear it now.
Because I don't mean fucking Jack Kirby's Doughboy, Robert. I mean the Pillsbury Doughboy.
Oh, the Pillsbury. I'm a big fan of him too. I like all his products.
It's true story. It's true story. I was in 5th grade, and at that time I was still drawing my own books, and I had a strange perception of comics because despite it being the mid 90s, I was under the impression that even new comics could sort of take the journey that all comics had. So a rational thought I had when I was like 10 years old at this time was that it's okay if there's not a lot of plot in the first issue because they can just fight a slime monster, because everybody fights like a giant monster in the first issue. I was just thinking of the first cover of Fantastic Four, but of course that had come out 30 years ago. But I thought that, that's what a first comic starts to look like, a 1964 comic or a 1938 comic. And then you eventually grow into what they looked like in the present, even though we were, of course, living in the fucking present. So I was a strange kid. And to that end, my friends who were not comic fans, for whatever reason, loved the Pillsbury Doughboy. They loved drawing him. But again, I don't know how these things happen, but I was acutely aware of copyright law, so I couldn't do a book about the Pillsbury Doughboy. So I changed his cape from being a blue and white, what I presume is a sailor type thing, into a plaid cape. And I called him Clone Dough. And that was a book that I wrote and drew when I was like 10 years old. But yeah, it was not. I wish it was Kirby's Doughboy, man. It's because it's actually much dumber and much more.
Hey, listen, that's a scoop, Bob.
Really
we got a scoop.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's great because we went from blah ha ha to hee hee.
Yeah, I mean, it's true.
All right. So what else is keeping you busy in 2024? Do you have any projects coming up you could share with the listeners? Anything like anything new? I mean, I know I've seen like the 2099 crossover you're doing.
Yeah, let me think about what we can. So, well, we just announced that I'm doing Ewoks, which is exciting for me because I used to always watch. As a kid, I would go skiing. And then every Sunday after skiing, I would come home and I would watch Return of the Jedi on like a VHS tape. Now, to be clear, I had heard like there's like a quarter second where you could see that Twi'lek dancer's boob, and so like 11-year-old me was like, pause it, but I don't think that's true, by the way. But it got me
checking later, though. I can assure you that.
But beyond that, I as a kid, I loved Jedi. And chief among that was because I was right in the fucking target demo for the Ewoks. So, I loved Wicket. I watched that cartoon show, which has quite the theme song. And so when we realized it was coming up in the 40th anniversary of the TV movies, it just felt like the right time to do something with Ewoks. I brought it up. The 2099 editor is also the Star Wars editor, so it's very convenient for me. And it just, it all came together. But like that being said, I'm super, super excited about it. We're getting to celebrate the Ewoks. We're getting to introduce new Ewoks, use nearly every, even if it's for just a split second, nearly every named one you can think of, and bring in a lot of the Endor creatures and things that haven't really been canonized, that are going to be canonized for the first time. So that's very, very exciting. We have more 2099, as you said. We just wrapped up Annihilation. All the pieces are now in place for Conquest, we've been doing these series of one-shots. Miguel O'Hara, Spider-Man 2099 in January of this year introduced cyberpunk future versions of a lot of Marvel's classic horror characters. And then Annihilation did the same for a lot of their cosmic and sci-fi characters. So now that all the pieces are in play, Conquest is going to bring as many of them together as we can manage. It's a giant tragic hero story for Dracula as he cuts this swath of vengeance across the universe against actually Spider-Woman's people, who are going to be debuting for the first time in full. And of course, every sentient being in the galaxy is caught in between. So here's Miguel. Here's a ragtag group of heroes trying to save lives and get right in the middle of it. It's really pretentious to say that it's based off Paradise Lost, but I'm a pretentious guy. And it's not really an adaptation or anything, but what it is based on, one of my advisors in college was a Milton scholar, and she talked a lot about how Lucifer in Paradise Lost is thought of as the first romantic hero in fiction. And so in that respect, that's kind of how we're looking at Dracula. He is doing a terrible thing in many cases, but he's doing it for righteous reasons. And that's what makes it tragic, as you'll see the first issue. So a big cosmic blow up in 2099. For folks who are looking for more spider characters, many are going to be debuting as part of Spider-Woman's people. We'll have Webweaver 2099. We'll have Spider-Side 2099. We'll have Ghost Spider, White Widow. You'll see where they all fit in. And it's just it's a big cosmic space opera with the heroes of 2099 stuck in between. So very, very excited for that. And then there'll be a little hint about what's coming next at the end. And what else is going on? There's more Scarlet Witch coming, which is very exciting for me. We just announced that the 5th issue, which is going to be out in October, is a Halloween crossover with Daredevil. And Wanda actually hasn't
cool.
met her that often, so like or met him that often rather, because it's Matt, it's not Elektra. And so it's been fun putting them together. It's a little uses a character that we introduced in Crypt of Shadows last year. And just like a nice haunted subway one shot that I'm really, really excited about. If for folks who are WWE fans, there's a nice little WWE nod in there too to the late Bray Wyatt, which was important to me. I thought he was a very creative person. And then there's even more. You'll see something from me in the Venom office pretty soon that I'm finishing up now. And that, of course, is not even touching that I'm doing Gotcha Man at Mad Cave. That I'm doing some originals in the coming year. There's a lot going on.
Wow.
I'll actually in 2025 be working for one of the few companies that I've never worked for yet in comics. So that's about as big of a tease as I can give. And somewhere on my Wikipedia, people can try to figure out what it is.
Nice. And if fans want to follow you, what's the best place to do that?
I'm at the Steve Orlando on Twitter and Instagram.
Excellent. All right, we'll be sure to include links in the show notes if anybody wants to check that out. Steve, got to tell you, it has been a lot of fun wrapping cap with you. Thanks so much for joining the show.
I mean, it's my pleasure, but now I have to get both of you. Other than Steve, who is your favorite Cap and your favorite Bucky? Other than Steve.
Other than Steve.
And you know what? We gotta pull Sam too, because it's too easy. Like that's not what I'm looking for.
Oh, I see. So we're talking about some of the failed Captain America.
Yeah, I mean, we're
right?
here. Like, I gotta know. It doesn't have to be that he's a good character. Who do you find most compelling? It can even be a tragic one. It can be, like it can be one of the. Was Robert Smith one of them or something? Smith was like
Roscoe.
Yeah, like
Roscoe.
like it can be Robert Smith from the Cure is actually.
There you go.
I'm a Jeff Mace guy. So I do love I love the Golden Age Patriot. I love the fact that that Roy sort of repurposed him to help fill that gap, and I love the fact that I love the way that they sort of explored that in the Patriot miniseries, and that he eventually took off the uniform and just became a small town reporter again after that, and settled down with Golden Girl. Love that. I love that whole mythos that they've sort of pulled out of this sort of a deep cut character from the Golden Age.
Yeah, I thought you were going to go with William Burnside, Bob. I know that's a big favorite of yours.
I do like William. I think he's such a conflicted character, and I do hope somebody uses him again. I know he's sort of off on the funny farm or something, I guess, recovering after the Two Americas arc. But he's compelling because he's psychologically damaged, and I find a kinship in that. So.
Well, I need to interrupt before we go to Rick, because your authentic background reminds me that we barely talked about U.S. Agent, who I do think is actually the most compelling and perfect person who's been Cap. That's it. I don't think I've ever written him, but because Force Works was a big thing for me, I actually love U.S. Agent. but as you said with like some of the others, like I do think he's wildly fallible, and he's you know he's
Mhm.
has such deep faults. Um, but I do think that, and he's probably like, he's had some really rough characterization in his life. So I would say that I don't know that I think that he's a bad person, but I think that he's painfully underinformed,
Yeah,
and,
right. That's well
and
put. Yeah.
but I think that that's the tragedy of him, because I think
Mhm.
that he is, I mean, his childhood was horrific. Um, and I think that he kind of like is a person who wants to do good, but is held back by his own ignorance, if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense.
Like there's a world, as I like book the Marvel universe, where like eventually he ends up dying in the same way that Supergirl does, instead in Superman's place in Crisis, where he like like, or I mean, why am I not, I should make it pretentious. He ends up dying like in Tale of Two Cities, where like he ends up like his last thing is that he does something to save Steve or Sam.
Mhm.
And I'm sure he'd be back in like 2 months, by the way. But no, I don't know. I think he's very interesting. And I forgot. And I also like, in a visual level, I love the classic US agent costume with the black instead of it's the one that's on your background where with the
Right.
horizontal stripes. I
Yeah.
love that look. But anyway, I interrupted. So Rick, like, who is your deep cut cap? And why is it the Spirit of 76?
Yeah, no, it's a good one. I actually, you had stolen. I was going to go with John Walker because I really did think he's a relatable character, and that he's not bad in any way. He's just easily manipulated, and I think falls for the right push. So he was going to be my choice. I don't know. We had Bob. Remember, we had Matthew Glover on. We did the top 10 alternate reality caps, and so I was trying to see if there was maybe one from there that we may look at. So I don't know if that would.
I mean, Super Soldier would have to be my answer to that. So
Yeah, the amalgam was pretty cool. And uh,
It's
I
all
don't know.
the Captain America core. I think it was a 5-issue miniseries. Was
Yeah,
a fun
written by Mark
exploration
Waid.
of.
oh
Yeah,
well, I mean, if you read Scarlet Witch, if you want to go really, if you want to dig in, I did put Sarah Rogers Crusader in an issue of Scarlet Witch, which is legit from one What If the Secret Wars Never Ended comic that Jay Fair.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't know. Again, I'm like, I found it compelling. It's Steve's daughter with Rogue. She somehow manages to have Mjolnir and the shield. So that, I mean, if we're talking alternate reality, it'd be hard for me not to bring up her, or American Dream. I also love.
Mm.
yeah.
But I'm stepping on you again, Rick. So I need to get back.
Listen, there's so many choices out there. I'm gonna go with John Walker. I know that seems like a cop out, but
It's not.
I mean, obviously, I really enjoyed Epting's run with having Bucky as Cap, but you said we couldn't pick him, so I'll go with John Walker.
Funny, I actually said you couldn't pick Sam. I don't.
I thought you said Bucky, but okay.
I should have said that too. Like, you can't pick the big three because it's too easy. Although I did like a lot of, well, I mean, I really like that run too. So what can I say? There's a whole nother podcast to do about why Cap and Batman seem to be eerily on similar journeys on many major points. And let me tell you from the inside, I think it is often just a coincidence. Like, I can't imagine that Ed and Grant were like talking at the same time that Batman and Cap both died and both got sent through time,
Yeah,
instead of dying. And both got replaced by their former sidekick, by the way.
Yeah.
Uh,
yeah, that's true, right?
but it is kind of amusing to me to think about, and it's happened a couple times before too, back in the day. Like, but those are the big ones. I was like, damn. But no, Bucky's Cap was great. And I mean, he's not a Cap, but I have to say I also stumped for Battlestar. I actually think the design is cool and very simple. And sometimes simplicity is fine. Uh,
Yeah. Battlestar, when he was what was he before that? He was part of John's not left and right winger.
The
Gosh,
Bucky, wasn't it the Buckies,
there
but it
was
was
the
acronym?
Buckies, yeah, and
the
then it was supposed
Buckies.
to be like a racial slur, so they decided because it actually was a racial slur back in many decades ago, but so they decided to change him
Oh,
to Battlestar.
I mean, that's probably for the best. Uh, but no, I do enjoy him. I mean, could you imagine doing left winger and right winger today?
Oh my God. No, no. So, and somehow they worked together.
Yep, you know what? Like I want to do the amalgam comic where it's them, but they get merged with Hawk and Dove, and it just becomes the most like nuclear firestorm of a comic that's ever been published.
Oh yeah.
I actually I spent 11 months trying to make Hawk and Dove work, and I'm kind of sad that it never worked out at DC because I thought I had a way in, but sadly did not come to pass. If you think I like the King, I do like the King, but right behind that would be Ditko stuff. So the chance to work in them would always be exciting to me.
Very cool. Well, you listen, man. We could talk to you forever. You have so many different ideas and so many stories and going on in your head. But we enjoyed this, and we're very excited for Avengers Assemble. And everybody out there, if it's not on your pull list, make sure you go ahead and add it right away because it does come out next week, September 11th. And so make sure that you rush out to your local comic shop and pick up all the copies, right? Because there's like 5 different covers for number 1.
We have some covers. That is absolutely true.
Thanks again for coming on the show. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Well, that was a lot of fun talking with Steve. He certainly has a love for Cap that I didn't know. I knew he loved Cap, but I didn't know he loved Cap that much.
I know we went down the rabbit hole there a bit. He was very enthusiastic, and I'm glad he was willing to share so much about the things that he found so interesting and endearing about the character.
Yeah, and as I mentioned before, do check out Avengers Assemble. Number 1 comes out on Wednesday, September 11th, which is just around the corner. So as a fan of Justice League International from the 80s and 90s, I really enjoyed that version of the Justice League because and J.M. DeMatteis and Keith Giffen were the writers. I love the little give and take, the back and forth between the characters, right? It wasn't just about the next enemy, wasn't about just the next crisis. It was figuring out what we're going to have for lunch that day. It was where does the furniture go? It was jokes and things like that going back and forth. So if there's a little bit of that in this, I think I'm going to really super enjoy it. And I think we got a hint of that in the solicitation when it says Cap and these characters are off to face the crisis, and Hawkeye's back at the mansion hosting a poker game for the people who got left behind or the latecomers. So you almost sense that there's maybe a little bit of humor there.
Well, one of the other things is I love the fact that he really culled a lot of characters out of past Avenger teams, and quite frankly, a lot of characters that don't get a lot of play. And I think that's something that I learned about him in previous interviews. He talked a bit about, but I think that's pretty cool because some of these characters are really interesting. And they just sort of languish for a while. And he, when folks bring them back into the, into the front again, so they get a little limelight, we get a little more depth to those characters. And, that makes it enjoyable for me because I like the new shiny thing.
I'm looking forward to it. I'm also I like Wonder Man.
Mm-hmm.
I find him to be a fun, interesting character. And, Hawkeye is always a lot of fun. I was never a big Power Pack fan, but
Right,
I
yeah.
am going to be interested to see
Yeah.
how she plays out too, because
Sure.
that'd be kind of cool.
Yeah.
All right, so check that out next week. And then also speaking of next week, we are come back for episode 205. We're going to be doing part 2 of our long tail series, which is Secret Empire, which is the Steve Englehart and Sal Buscema story. And we're in part 2 of this. So it's going to be Captain America 171 from 1974. So make sure you come back next week for that. Bob, anything else? Any closing words?
Boy, I wish I had some closing wisdom. I do want to leave you with, I wrote down this quote from Steve, and he said, he wants to do the right thing, but he's held back by ignorance. And I love that quote. I'm going to try to work that into my week somehow.
Are you talking about, was that what he was talking about, John Walker?
He was talking about John Walker. And I thought, man, that's really, that just nails it, the character right on the head.
Yeah.
It's so profound, and so simple, but it just really encapsulates the character, and particularly folks who really love the character. So yeah, I'm gonna chew on that one for a while.
Oh, Bob, by the way, after we spoke, I guess it was last episode, I don't remember, where you had told me that I mispronounce monster.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mentioned it to my wife. I was like, "Hey, Meg, she was like, oh yeah, you do that all the time." And I was like, "Oh, so it's Munster." She goes, "Yeah, you do that. You say Munster."
Oh, that's great. I can't believe you asked her.
I did. I was like, all totally self-conscious about it. Thanks, Bob. All right. Well, I'm Rick Verbanis, and he's Bob Lucius. And thank you very much for listening. We appreciate all of the comments, whether it's on the YouTube page, on the Facebook page. We appreciate the ratings, whether it's on Apple or Spotify, and the thumbs up on YouTube. All of that is really, really important to us. So thank you for doing that. And as always, we thank you for listening to another episode of the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast.